So, as I understand, you're writing a book on Micheal Harrington. I knew you were doing research, and are you complete? Have you completed your book?
Yes. First of all, how's my volume sound?
It's better. It's still a little low, but it's better.
All right. So, I to answer your question, I have finished a book on Micheal Harrington. I actually wrote it mostly through 2018 and to early 2019, and it's just mostly a biography, what he did, who he was, and what his ideas were.
Okay, that's very interesting. The other day, I was reading an article, like a sort of biographical article on Micheal Harrington Monthly Review. I thought it was really an amazing article. And then I looked, wow, Doug Greene wrote this. I didn't know you wrote it. It's an amazing article. Okay, well, first, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about Micheal Harrington, like his political background. First, he was originally connected with the Shachtmanites, or he came from a Catholic, sort of a leftist Catholic background. He was part of the Catholic workers movement.
Hmm. Yeah, so Harrington politically is very interesting. He comes from a middle class Catholic background, living in St. Louis, Missouri. He's born in 1928. He's very much like that's his whole world. He's very Catholic. I believe when he was very young, he even considered becoming a priest. And he went to private Catholic schools his whole life.
Okay.
Eventually, when he graduated high school, and he graduated fairly early, it was 1944, he was still too young to be drafted into World War II, so he ended up going to Holy Cross here in Massachusetts. And he was unsure for a lot of his time in school what he wanted to do with his life. His father wanted him to be a lawyer, and he was starting to get into the more social aspects of Catholicism, the more like, help the poor.
Right, right.
And he's also interested in literature, in politics, and philosophy, and poetry, and he kind of jumps around a bit. He goes to Yale to try and study law. It doesn't work. He starts losing his faith from reading all this existentialism.
Mm-hmm.
And after, he goes to the University of Chicago to study literature and poetry. And all this time he's around all these lefty backgrounds because CP and various other left parties were still very big. Because McCarthyism is just hitting. Eventually, he is back in his hometown and he sees this, he's working, I think it's a social worker or something. And he sees all this horrible poverty. And he says, I'm going to devote my life to working for poor people, but he's not really sure what the hell to do. Right. So he ends up going to New York. He's doing some odd jobs, hanging out with bohemians, with leftists. And around 1950-ish, 50, 51 or something, he ends up recommitting to his Catholic faith, and he joins Dorothea Day's Catholic worker movement.
Okay.
And that's how he gets involved with that. And she's a very fascinating figure, and so is the Catholic worker movement, which is still around.
Right.
To put it very simply, it's serve the people in a Maoist way. They're going to support people. They're going to live like them. They're essentially taking vows of poverty. And Harrington throws himself into this. And at the same time, he's actually, because he had actually registered for the draft when he was younger, he was eligible for the draft of the Korean War. He, at this point in his life, is also a pacifist, and he refuses to go.
Okay.
And he was afraid for a long time he was going to be thrown in jail for refusing to serve in Korea. And it's a long enough story, but he's eventually discharged and he doesn't go to jail. But this is the height of McCarthyism, and he's also starting to see like the limits of like the Catholic worker movement.
Okay.
He meets up with members of the YPSL, which is the Young People's Socialist, the youth of the Socialist Party of America, the party of Debs and Eugene.
Right. There were several iterations of Yipsel. Like there was one in the 30s, and then another time later in the 60s.
Yes, he's in
Right.
the actual middle one in the 50s.
Okay. Right.
Um, and he eventually he reads some literature. He essentially becomes an atheist, and for the final time, he leaves the church. He always stays a cultural Catholic. There's kind of a nostalgia for that
Right.
world in him, but he is an atheist, and he becomes a member of the socialist, the Yipsel. And
Okay.
interestingly enough, he doesn't stay in the Yipsel long because the Socialist Party, or at least the parent wing, is supporting the Korean War. Norman Thomas, who must be a horrible pacifist, thinks we need to stop communism and
Yeah.
bomb a few million people.
Right. Right.
Harrington ends up in loggerheads with Thomas and the parent party of
Right. Not many people know this, but Norman Thomas was his politics became he was for a right wing Cold Warrior. He became a very right wing Cold Warrior. Not a lot of people know this today.
That's true. I was also reading recently stuff on the cultural Cold War, and he really actually was getting CIA money, and he knew
Right.
CIA director.
Yeah.
So this is a very shady character. I don't want to actually say that Harrington he was never any CIA funding or anything like that, but
No, Norman Thomas was.
Thomas was. So we can accuse him of that because it's true.
Right.
So interestingly enough, while Harrington is at loggerheads with Yipsel, he's actually in contact with members of the let me see if I remember it, the International Socialist League,
The ISL. Right.
ISL, which is the Shachtmanite Party.
Right. They descended. There was the Workers' Party. The Shachtmanites split with Trotskyism, like 39-40. They became the Workers' Party. They disagreed over the nature of the Soviet Union. They thought it was a form of bureaucratic collectivism. And Trotsky believed in uncritical military defense of the Soviet Union, but Shachtman didn't. There was a fight over the Winter War in Finland and all that. And then the Shachtman and his group went further and further to the right after the split. Just wanted to add that.
So to me, it's actually kind of this whole political morass is very strange because a lot of the younger Shachtmanites are opposed to the Korean War, but they're moving this very rightward direction. They're anti-communist. They're at this point they are starting to support more progressive Democrats, and officially they've dropped any pretense of being Trotskyist.
Right.
And Shachtman himself, in a few articles in late 1950, had essentially, in all but name, he'd argued for this critical support for the Korean War. So Shachtman himself is not some kind of principled anti-imperialist or anti-war figure.
Right. His politics were pretty horrible in that regard.
I mean, it's basically, if leftists were waging the Korean War, on the west side, we would support it and everything. But
yeah.
Stalin is evil. We have to bomb them. I'm simplifying a bit, but anyhow, officially though, the ISL did oppose the Korean War. I do want to be clear on that.
Right.
The long story short, the split in the Yipsel in like 1953-54. Harrington and his crew essentially joined with the Shachtmanites. They form, I believe it's the Young Socialist Alliance,
Okay.
which is a new youth wing for the Shachtmanites. So this is, again, height of McCarthyism. The ISL is incredibly small. So if you're talented, like Harrington was, you can move up pretty fast. And he writes for their paper, The Labor Advocate. At one point, I went through every issue, and at least from the time he joined, and there was almost always an article by him in some capacity. So it could be anything from politics in China to desegregation.
Okay.
He was, by both Shachtman and other comrades, be brilliant, dedicated, which he was. He was speaking on campuses. He was recruiting people, and he wrote for their theoretical review, the New International. He reviewed this, and one thing he did, which I thought fascinating, was he actually translated into English the opening chapter of George Lucas's History and Class Consciousness.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Oh, in 1957, he translated the opening chapter of George Lucas's History and Class Consciousness.
Okay, I didn't know that. Never knew that. Okay.
It's a very pivotal work in the history of Marxism, and speaking for myself, it's like the one thing I will always defend Harrington on, the one and only thing.
Sure.
Like that book.
Yeah.
Now, to fast forward just a bit, in 1956, the Communist Party is essentially collapsing because of two things. And it's not McCarthyism, it's the Khrushchev report on Stalin, which just destroys their faith in that, and then the invasion of Hungary.
Right.
In a matter of months, the party just plummets, like tens of thousands of people leave. And for about 2 decades, they had been the most predominant and largest force on the left.
Right.
So there's this new opening, and McCarthyism is starting to lessen. So other people on the left, Shachtman, Thomas, are thinking, we can fill this gap and create a new socialist movement. And Shachtman, again, his politics are right-wing social democracy at this point. And Norman Thomas and the Socialist Party are so tiny, and not to sound a little, put it bluntly, they're aging.
Yeah, right.
It's literally a retirement home for old leftists.
Right.
So to speed up the story, there's negotiations between Thomas, and Thomas wants younger people in.
Yeah.
Shachtman doesn't need to have a pretense that he's a Leninist at this point. So in 1958 or so, the parties fused. Shachtman, Harrington, etc. joined the Socialist Party.
Okay.
And it is basically, because the Socialist Party, the cadre are so old, younger people, without really trying, can take over. So Shachtman and Harrington essentially become leaders by default.
Okay. They just walked in.
Yeah, so this is the end of the 50s, and Harrington is very excited by this. He wants to, he thinks we're going to build a new socialist movement, and he travels the country, he does speaking, and he's starting to get involved in democratic politics at this point. It's still tepid, it's on a local level. And in the early 60s, to keep bringing it forward, there's starting to be fervent on campuses. Things are happening. Students are getting involved in the civil rights movement and, opposing the U.S. in Cuba.
Right.
And there was a group called the League of Industrial Democracy, which is kind of a youth group that was connected to the Socialist Party. It wasn't like their youth wing. They had one, much broader. But it had been moribund for years.
Right.
Trying to revive it. And there's younger people in it. One of whom is very famous Tom Hayden.
Okay, yeah.
Died maybe, 5, within the last 10 years.
A couple years ago, yeah. He became a senator later on.
Tom Hayden has been involved in doing civil rights journalism. He's not a theoretician at all, but he's very motivated, very idealistic. So are a lot of these other young people in. And Harrington is, they're joining the League of Industrial Democracy, which is renamed to Students for a Democratic Society, or as I'll call them, SDS.
Right.
And they're like, they need to write a new statement of what they believe, what they want to do. And Harrington is one of the few older people, not that old, in his 30s, but for them, he's older.
Yeah.
They trust.
Yeah.
Hayden and crew, they write what is a very famous Port Huron statement. And if you read the Port Huron statement, and Harrington's ideas are very didn't write it per se, but his ideas appear in it. And I'll get to some of them in a few minutes, but basically an orientation towards the labor movement, union, supporting for civil rights, realignment in the Democratic Party. I'll get to that after this section.
Okay.
And basically to build this new mass movement. And when the Port Huron Statement is adopted by SDS, the founders, Hayden and crew, think, this is reflecting Harrington's worldview and everything. But Harrington is incensed at this document. It is really mad.
Yeah.
And the reason he's mad is he thinks, to put it very simply, is he thinks he's insufficiently anti-communist.
Right.
Because if you read the document, it's not communist. It actually says we don't like the Soviet Union, they're oppressive.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's also saying the United States is, it started the Cold War. It's supporting all these repressive dictatorships. It's not fighting for freedom.
Right.
And to put it like this, it's actually sort of gambling. Like it really is neither Washington nor Moscow.
Yeah. Yeah.
But Harrington thinks this is terrible. We can't let this stand, Like we can't let it be like. And he's also upset at one point. There's an observer from a communist youth group at SDS. They didn't do anything. Little kid. But he thinks it's like the equivalent of having Nazis there.
Right.
So, fast forward is he actually brings Hayden and other leaders of SDS to the headquarters, and he essentially puts them on trial. And it's basically an interrogation, it's a trial, and they change the locks on the SDS offices. Can't let this stand. Now, eventually, other older people in the more adult section of the League of Industrial Democracy and the Socialist Party, like Norman Thomas, get involved. They kind of cool things down, and they make amends.
Right.
And Harrington spends the rest of his life apologizing for how he treated Hayden and early SDS. But he actually, so it's like, he did overreact.
Yeah.
But it's also important to note, Harrington himself recognizes that if they hadn't split over this, if he had actually been a little more diplomatic, they would have split eventually.
Yeah. Yeah.
They, over Vietnam, over the issue of anti-communism, they were moving in a different direction.
Right.
One that was opposition to the Vietnam War, and in many cases in SDS supporting the victory of the National Liberation Front, and working with communism against war movement. All of the things he did.
Right.
So that's with SDS, and they eventually do split finally in 1965.
Okay.
But let me tell you a little about realignment.
Okay.
Realignment is it's something that's actually originally developed by Max Shachtman.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically they're all these how should I put it, progressive constituencies are part of the Democratic Party.
Right.
So labor unions, the AFL-CIO, black people, immigrants, basically a lot of poor people. And we can support progressive Democrats. They were this in the 40s, off and on, if it's 50s too. Harrington is the one who really refines it.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Sure. Harrington refines and develops the theory of realignment.
Okay.
And this is, so it's mostly associated with his name for good reason. And to put it bluntly, realignment means the progressive people who support the Democrats we need to, basically, they don't control the party. It's controlled by capitalists and segregationists. So realignment means we need to play this long game of 33rd dimensional chess.
Right.
All the racists and the capitalists leave the Democrats and join the Republican Party and transform or realign the Democratic Party
Right.
into an equivalent of the Social Democratic Party, like
Right.
in Europe.
In Europe, right.
Yeah. And then, it's part of the strategy, this new Social Democratic Party will get into office, very progressive, and it will support all these reforms and create a welfare state, and then through means that have never been clear to me, will push to socialism. And basically, Harrington wants to create this movement of like moderate sections of the new left, labor bureaucracy and civil rights, and do this realignment.
Right.
And he said one point in this phrase, and I'm going to paraphrase it, it's like, it's only through here, realignment, that a beginning can be made.
Yeah.
And it's true that in a certain sense that there is changes in the Democratic Party, with Nixon, in the later 60s, but it doesn't fundamentally change its class nature at any point.
No.
Then and still now, a bourgeois imperialist party.
Right.
And
So the Southern racists eventually did leave the Democratic Party, but the Democratic Party as a whole moved further to the right, opposite of what the realignment strategy predicted.
right. And the realignment, Harrington lays it out in a number of writings. It's in Socialist Party programs in the 60s. And
Okay.
it fits for a number of reasons. First of all, it's like to get in the Democratic Party, to get like an position of power and influence, you have to be willing to be anti-communist, for one,
Yeah.
and be communist. You have to be reformist. You have to adopt all these litanies. You have to be willing to compromise with liberals.
Right.
Or sees them as the natural allies of socialists, liberals. And ultimately, the Socialist Party really doesn't think it's supposed to be an inside-outside strategy, but ultimately it's really just an inside strategy.
Yeah.
And they're not
Yeah. Right.
going to subordinate everything to those politics.
Right. Right.
And I would argue that in different names, those politics are still the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yep.
oh, okay, go ahead.
He bought into like a popular front strategy.
Yes.
Non-Stalinist popular front strategy. He admired what the CPUSA did in the 30s, which was disastrous, basically.
He actually had the saying, he's like, I want a popular front without Stalinism.
Yeah, a popular front minus, that was a political disaster.
So, this is actually part of the legacy of Harringtonism. If you look at Jacobin articles, you'll see...
Sorry, can you say that again?
Oh, sorry. If you look at the legacy of Harringtonism this day, and you look at recent articles of Jacobin, you'll see them praising the Popular Front for essentially the same type of rationale.
Right,
it's like,
right.
And
right.
it's accident. That's straight out of Harrington. They don't like Stalin, the Soviet Union, but they like the Popular Front, that whole
Right.
idea.
Right. That's interesting, yeah.
And part of the reason they like it is because that's the time when the Communist Party was supposed to have Social Democrats.
Right, right. So, how influential is Harrington in the DSA today? Are the Harringtonites pretty much in charge?
See, I might be a minority view on this, but I think Harrington's ideas, let me put it this way, in most leftist groups, Trotskyists or Maoists, you'll find people who will quote like Trotsky or Lenin or Mao to support their positions.
Right, right. Hmm.
I mean, I do stuff like that too. You will not find people who make those, quote Harrington like the same way.
Yeah, they won't quote him, but...
There is certain cosmetic changes the DSA has made, like leaving the Second International, adopting things like BDS. But I would argue that, by and large, his ideas are the common sense of the DSA, and by extension, actually, a lot of the American left, broadly speaking. Because DSA, they have a lot of people elected to office. I think they're all Democrats.
Yeah.
Might be like a few who are not, but by and large, they don't have a revolutionary program.
Right.
Mostly liberals, and they're reformers.
They're not pushing for political independence of working people. They're ultimately tied back into the Democratic Party.
Right. So the DSA did pass at their last convention a program for eventually creating a socialist party through something called the Dirty Break. I would argue, if you want me to get into it, it is essentially the realignment strategy for the 21st century.
Updated version of it, yeah.
It's developed by someone named Seth Ackerman.
Okay, yeah, he wrote a famous article in Jacobin.
Yes.
Yeah.
Blueprint for a new party. And in the article, he basically said Democrats are basically a ballot line. They're not a traditional party.
Right.
So we could run socialists as Democrats. Somehow they're accountable to us. And we develop our forces and capacity through their resources. We use them. And eventually, we split off and create a new party. But I've noticed that all that talk is completely vanished since this election.
Yeah.
Kind of, and that is something that DSA has officially adopted, more or less.
Okay.
But they also, it's never quite clear to me how that's really that different from the alignment beyond, say, some semantics.
Right. Do you see any possibility for an eventual split in the DSA? Like, people say probably not, but will a segment actually finally break from the Democrats?
That's a good question. There have been at various times in the last 3 or 4 years different caucuses in there that were, again, within the confines of the DSA that were more left-leaning. But most of them have either dissolved, and they're always unclear on the Democratic Party question.
Right.
And I just don't see it in the near future.
Yeah.
I'm interested to see what would happen if Sanders loses both the nomination and, say, presidency. What would happen? If he were to somehow win, I'm not sure. I mean, I don't see a split happening. Right now, I don't know what force is kind of hold attraction. I mean, I follow this, but at the most, I've just kind of seen these little blips of groups that just kind of fizzle out. And maybe I hear from people on Facebook or wherever, oh, I'm in DSA and I don't support the Democrats. It's like, well, you're not like an organized force. I'm certain they're unified members. I just don't see it. I just see them becoming practicing Harrington's politics with more vigor and youth, really.
Yeah.
I mean, their active membership overwhelmingly endorsed Bernie Sanders last year.
Yeah.
Is there any group or caucus you can say that, like, be opposed, supporting the party candidates? And
doesn't look like it,
I don't. I mean, I could be wrong, but I just don't.
Right, doesn't look that way. Yeah, interesting. Now, Micheal Harrington wrote a couple of interesting books later, with the politics of God's funeral. Official confession, I went through a Micheal Harrington stage like years ago, long time ago, and believe it or not, he was my first introduction to socialist theory. I've evolved since then, of course. Definitely, I'm not a Harrington fan, which is why I'm interviewing you on this. But I went through a stage where I read a bunch of his books, The Politics of God's Funeral, which was very interesting, references Gramsci and development of religions, and what's Socialism, Past and Future, a few other of his books. What's your take on some of his books? His later books, yeah. Go ahead.
I just mentioned briefly, he wrote, one of his earlier books is The Other America, which is very
Right.
important. It's a short little 150-page book on poverty in America. And
Yeah.
this is kind of after the 50s when people were told, oh, poverty is essentially a thing of the past.
Yeah.
We've overcome class divisions. And he writes this journalistic article. It's very kind of liberal in its approach. But it's a very well-written, passionate book. And it influences Kennedy and Johnson, with the Great Society program. And that's a book of his that's worth reading. And as you mentioned, he wrote a lot of other books. The book that you mentioned on socialism was actually his last book. Like, he was, literally writing it as he's dying.
Right. It's thyroid cancer.
It's actually based on, in many respects, it's a kind of a rehash of an earlier book he wrote in the 70s on socialism.
Okay.
Same socialism. And it's basically his view on socialism. His take on Marx, Lenin, Trotsky, Third World Revolution,
Right.
Western European social democracy, all of it. And it's the same thing in the 91 book.
Right.
I'll say for those books that I don't like them at all because it's very clear he's well versed in these figures. He knows Marx, Lenin, etc. Anyone who's been in the movement that could know them. Anyone who's a scholar could know. But his class position and his politics as a reformist, he can distort them. He turned Marx into this kind of grandfatherly social democrat thing, and it's kind of amazing how he can twist some of these people. He doesn't like Gramsci, he doesn't like Lenin.
Yeah.
That helps save the Caesaritarianism, and there's all these misinterpretations of Marx's theory of imperialism, area, and almost I would say in a view of Third World Revolution, a very racist chauvinist view.
Yeah.
Actually have revolutions there, even though he, on the other hand, recognizes, well, there's no way out aside from revolution, but we should use
Right.
So I don't actually like pretty much those books. And he has other books written on poverty, other books in the 80s.
Right.
Books on the Third World, which is, it's good in the sense, it lays out his view on the Third World, but I don't agree with politics at all.
Okay.
And so you did mention his book on religion, which is the politics of God's control.
Yeah.
I actually enjoyed that at a certain level. I thought a lot of the intellectual history is fascinating, and how he was kind of looking at how religion and secular political movements respond to essentially the emergence of modernity and the end of religion as this cohesive, organizing force.
So could you speak just a little bit louder? You're
Sure.
fading out.
Yeah, so in that book, he talks about religion, how, religions and secular political movements respond to the emergence of modernity,
Right.
and the end of religion as its cohesive, organizing force. So I like a lot of that intellectual history just as a scholar. But also, his politics are very clear there. He thinks, religious believers and socialists need to unite against this godless capitalist world. He also says, Marxism is the secular religion, Stalinism is that dialectic of materialism leads to this kind of totalitarianism. None of, a lot of this, I just find it's either anti-communist or it's wrong.
Right.
But, again, it's still worth checking out in that sense. He has other books on building the left, and you kind of can see him wanting to embrace things like American values, like Jeffersonian democracy, popular front politics. So on the whole, I never ever went through any kind of Harringtonite phase at all, and it was only researching my book that I got all his books. At one point, I'd actually given away my copy of The Other America. I thought I'd never read it again.
Okay. Yeah.
But even though I don't agree with pretty much like 95+% of what he says, I would say this is a very smart and articulate and knowledgeable man. Like,
Right.
would,
Certainly, erudite guy. Yeah.
yeah, I think he is. Like he knows those figures as much as I do in some cases, and he can read them in their own languages. So
Yeah.
I remember checking references. Oh, he's actually got like this is published for another 20 years in English, but he's reading the German edition. So just
Right.
pretty. So I say he's like, and this is like the praise I think he should give is like he is a worthy adversary because he does articulate his own vision of socialism and Marxism. He calls it democratic Marxism.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
But it's of course Democrat. So I don't like most of Harrington's books.
Okay. Okay. That's good to know. That's good to know. So he had sort of a new class theory, like he adopted the Shachtmanites' bureaucratic collectivism, and he thought that a similar happened in the Soviet Union, and a similar class evolved in the West, like professional people, includes teachers with that, and he hoped to link this group up with the working classes, something like that, sort of an odd type of new class theory, I guess, or is it his analog of it?
Yeah, so he adopts this new class theory. It comes from the Shachtmanites. And basically he thinks this new class of like professionals, managers, technocrats, however you want to put it, is in the East, in the Soviet bloc, in China, etc., they become totalitarians. They're the bureaucratic collectivist ruling class.
Right.
That's on that level. In the West, he thinks that there is that totalitarian possibility from the new class.
Right.
Thinks, based on, say, these students in the 60s, that there is this democratic potential in them. And he wants to bring them in as part of his new majority, and that they would push, they would become like the driving force of realignment.
Right.
In practical terms, he always wants to reach out to the moderate sections of the new left.
Okay.
And that's actually a big difference with him and Shachtman. Shachtman, by the later 60s, just hates all sections of the new left. Moderate revolutionary just hates them.
Yeah, he went pretty far to the right. Like Shachtman supported by 70, 71, he supported Nixon and the Vietnam War while still regarding himself as an orthodox Marxist, which is kind of bizarre.
Yeah, so I can give you a little background on that, and this goes into Harrington's views on Vietnam.
Yeah.
Harrington himself, he doesn't actually, he is officially opposed to the war. But it's kind of how he wants to oppose the war that's an issue.
Okay.
And he thinks the way you oppose the war is you have to put pressure on the Democrats, you have to play nice, you can't alienate liberals,
Right.
you can't push them away because they're your allies. So that means you can't have militancy, you can't break the law, you can't have communists involved in the anti-war movement. And of course, you have to make sure that you adopt the reigning narrative that the North Vietnamese are equally to blame for the war.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that means, of course, policing the anti-war movement without all these unsavory radicals. Which he does. And it's a quandary for him because on the one hand, it's like he's not a super bloodthirsty person, but he wants Johnson in there because of the Great Society. He likes it. I think it's gonna like the rebirth of the New Deal and all that.
Yeah.
So he really likes that, but he doesn't necessarily like the war. But he won't come out really and do much beyond putting pressure on liberals and everything. But in the end result, it's an ineffective anti-war strategy. The militants of SDS and the larger anti-war movement.
Right.
Now, Shachtman himself was gung-ho for the war, and he's eventually abandoning essentially the realignment strategy by this.
Yeah. He abandoned it? Okay.
And after 68, there develops like a more split between Harrington and Shachtman. Shachtman is for the Vietnam War to the bitter end. Harrington, 1968, is starting to oppose the Vietnam War a little more openly.
Okay.
And I think the big reason he's doing this, and it's why he's not in any sense of principle anything.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Oh, sure. I think a big reason he can oppose the Vietnam War a little more openly after 68 is because the Republicans in the White House.
Right, yeah, okay. Right. They always do that. They oppose imperialism if the Republicans are in power, but not if the Democrats are in power.
It's not a principled position, unlike other people who were opposed to it.
Exactly.
Harrington he's still enmeshed in Democratic Party politics, and in 1972, there's a Socialist Party that's essentially split between Shachtman and company, these real hardcore right-wing social democrats who support Richard Nixon in all but name.
Right.
And the centrist social democrats who support George McGovern, which, some people make fun of, like, Trotsky splits over these foolish things. All right, whatever. I'm sorry, this is kind of ridiculous. The party of Eugene Debs is, those are their two factions. That's really laughable.
Yeah.
So, around that same time, 72, 73, there's actually a big, Shachtman dies around this time. There's a three-way split in the Socialist Party. One split becomes it's a very left-wing split led by David McReynolds.
Was that the Debs caucus?
Yeah, the Debs caucus.
Oh, okay.
The current Socialist Party of the United States of America.
Right. They descend from that.
There's the majority of the Socialists, or a large group, renamed the party to Social Democrats USA. These people like Baynard Rustin. They're essentially they are anti-communist to the core. They're very right wing. They're involved in some of them get involved in CIA stuff.
Right. They're State Department socialists.
They are State Department socialists. Harrington leads the centrist split, which forms something called DASOC, the Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee. In his resignation letter, I should add, before this, Harrington is actually the head of the Socialist Party.
Okay.
When the Harrington resigns, he has his resignation letter, and it's basically, he said, I'm still support all these things, bureaucratic elections, realignment, etc. But he essentially is saying that Shachtman and company have left him. They've abandoned the original vision. So he never changed politics for these secondary issues. And that's, so DASOC, it's formed with, social, intellectuals like Harrington and labor bureaucrats and moderate sections of the new left. And in the 70s, they actually grow to be fairly large. They're involved in a lot of Democratic Party politics.
Okay.
In 76, they actually get the Democratic Party to adopt a fairly progressive program that it's like this rebirth New Deal that quickly gets abandoned once Carter's and Harrington feels so betrayed over it.
Right.
And they don't really do much in terms of opposition or anything. They just want to put pressure on Carter and everything. But DASOC grows fairly large throughout the 70s still. And they have kindred spirits in another group called the New American Movement.
Okay.
Which kind of originally like this revolutionary group, came out of FDS, but during the 70s, moderated, they became more social democratic.
Okay.
They supported Democratic Party candidates.
Right.
And in 1982, they fused with DASOC because there was no reason for them to be separate, and they formed the Democratic Socialists of America.
Okay. Okay. All right.
And throughout the 80s, DSA is probably the largest group on the very broad, left.
Yeah.
Very broad left.
Some people called it like an academic mailing list. If you lived in a college town, it wasn't difficult to get on their mailing list. I had roommates who were nominally in the DSA. Like everyone would. If you lived in a college town, you were on their mailing list, kind of.
Right. So DSA, and it's still true actually to a certain extent today, maybe a little less, but it's not a cadre group.
Yeah.
Like DSA, they have in the 80s 5,000 members. It's not 5,000 active members.
Right. Paper
You
members.
Pay for and you pay your dues. That's how your membership is determined. It's a little less today because there are a little more people active, but I would argue that the majority of DSA members are not.
Right.
Even assuming it's just 10% of DSA members today who are active, it's still quite large.
Yeah, true.
Larger than that who are active, but I doubt it.
True. They're supposed to be today like between 50 and 60,000, but probably the active members are around 30 or 40,000 or much less.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's optimistic, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case.
Okay.
So in the 80s, though, this will get towards the end of Harrington's life, is they support in 84 Walter Mondale for the Democratic Party. They stay up Jesse Jackson's campaign, which ironically is probably the best example of a realignment strategy.
Yeah.
Again, Jackson is still like very bureaucratic and top down. He's still in the Democratic milieu, and I wouldn't argue for supporting him under any circumstances.
And effectively, the Jackson campaign destroyed what was left of the 60s, 70s New Left, like the Maoist New Communist movement aligned and was wrecked around the Jackson campaign.
Yeah, so in 84, most of the Maoists, there are some important exceptions, but most of them liquidated into that, and they're gone.
Right.
So basically, they ended up re-meeting, they ended up back to the Democrats. But Jackson himself, within the confines of Democratic Party politics, was fairly progressive. He was New Deal social democratic on domestic issues, and opposed to a lot of the Central American stuff.
Right.
But DSA didn't support him. In 1988, during that election, Jackson ran again, and he was a little more moderate then. He was trying to play nice with business and everything. And he kind of toned down a lot of his rhetoric. DSA actually did support him then, but they still went for Dukakis.
Right. That's interesting. How was DSA? What was their orientation, or Micheal Harrington's orientation towards the Contra War? Like, I think he died a little while after Reagan's second term. I think the Contra War was heating up around 84, 85, if I remember. Or did he say anything about that, or U.S. involvement in Central America?
Again, he isn't a super bloodthirsty person, even though he does offer suggestions on how the U.S. should have a smart defense budget. Right. Not sure how that works, but he does visit Nicaragua at one point.
Okay.
But he is he's actually it seems more concerned with being taken in by the romanticism of the revolution. You know, ignoring the totalitarian potential there.
Yeah.
He does oppose it, and so do a lot of them, but it's mostly the way they oppose it is through Democratic Party channels, the labor bureaucracy. They do take part every now and then in some march, but they don't support that per se.
Right.
But again, it was telling to me reading about Harrington, where he's like, I don't want to, I don't want to sympathize too much with them down there because they're totalitarian.
Yeah, they're evil communist. I mean, imperialism sucks, but we can't be communist about it. Yeah, interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, a lot of Second International parties were critical of, like, the Contra War. Mitterrand, for instance, was. And but it's important to note that these were, at least in the Second International, criticisms of a lot of these policies of the United States were always done within the family. Their ultimate loyalty then was to the West. They could get critical at times, but it was never, we're going to, embrace Marxism.
Yeah. Some people say the Second International represents a wing of European capitalism against U.S. capitalism. They're trying to find their own little niche, own little influence.
I mean, it depends on the party. Some of them are much more pro-U.S. than others.
Right.
But it's important to note that when NATO was founded in 1948 or 9, that the Second International, or the Labour Party in Britain, was one of the founding members. There were other parties as well that were very aligned with U.S. interests, like the German Social Democracy.
Mm.
And so, a lot of these like the French Socialist Party, they are most cases they're very loyal to their own national capitalists, but there is kind of this residual looking to kindred spirits in various socialist parties.
Yeah. Interesting. Now, is there any evidence that Micheal Harrington himself had connections with the State Department or the CIA? Do we know? Is there any evidence he might have, or he stayed away from that? I mean, Shockman and some of his friends did, but
Yeah, so I will say there's no evidence that he was
okay.
in any CIA pay, any State Department pay. I think his politics should be criticized just on their demerits,
Right.
as opposed to who he was or was not in pay of. So, at one point, I think he was approached by CIA people when he planned to visit, like, West Germany or
Okay.
Austria, but he refused it.
Okay.
So it's a little credit where credit's due. But
Okay. Right.
on the other hand, a lot of the New York intellectuals who he hung around with in the 50s and 60s, they were getting CIA money.
Right.
Project. Thomas was getting CIA money. And in fundamental respects, he shared, and the CIA, at least in the 50s and 60s, was funding a lot of like these journals from the non-communist left, like Encounter. And Harrington shared a lot of their fundamental views on anti-communism, on loyalty to America, etc., but was not on any payroll.
Okay. Sure.
But yeah, it was. I mean, it would be this huge scandal, but as far as I know, nothing has ever come out.
Okay. That's fair. That's fair. Now, I was wondering what's your take? I think we largely agree, but what would be your take on Bernie Sanders and the Sanders campaign? And does the left have anything to gain from the campaign? Is it a complete disaster, or what would be your take on that?
So, I have very strong feelings about this. I have been opposed to Sanders for a long time. Whether in 2016 or this year, I don't think the left, broadly speaking, should be involved in any sense in the Democratic Party. It's an imperialist party.
Right.
And Sanders himself has a long history of voting for wars, voting for imperialism, funding wars he supposedly is opposed to.
Yeah.
He supports apartheid Israel, and he's voted in support of the IDF. And he's, echoed a lot of State Department rhetoric on things like Venezuela.
Right. Exactly. Called Chavez a dead communist dictator. Right.
And I've written an article on this too, and in all but name, he's a Democrat. So I think, based on the long history of what's happened to socialists and communists,
Sorry, you're fading out a little. Could you a little louder?
Sorry, I would say based on the long history of socialists and communists who've been involved in the Democratic Party, that you shouldn't be involved in that party because you essentially liquidate your program and your politics to support the politics of the liberal bourgeoisie. I think a lot of people, though, on a different level, are attracted to him and his ideas, and I think, you can patiently explain the limits of that, of what, the limits of reformism, of getting involved in the Democratic Party. But I think right now the American left is, I'm speaking very broadly, like all segments, it almost feels like a big sucking down into the Sanders campaign of the Democratic Party. And it's just literally putting your faith in a great man to deliver you.
Right.
So I think assuming Sanders got the nomination, I would argue not supporting him. And if there was actually like a left that had its act together and it had its own candidate, like on a revolutionary program, I'd say, support them.
Yeah.
I don't think it's even that's not going to happen. I'm actually for just staying out. I think also just saying you don't actually get socialism in the ballot box.
Yeah, I agree.
Basically, my position right now is, if we can, maybe we need some kind of revolutionary recruitment, building our own organizations and capacity. We can patiently explain to people all of this stuff without getting involved in the Democratic Party and without supporting Sanders. We don't have to be jerks about it. But on the other hand, I think a lot of leftists, broadly speaking again, it's very hard to recognize, a lot of groups, that, even if they have socialists in their name at this point, as anything I have much in common with. They're getting involved in the Democratic Party. It's like liquidationism, and it's going to just disarm you at crucial moments.
Right. Seems to be a tidal wave of enthusiasm, a tsunami for Sanders, and it's like King Canute asking the tides to stop. It's kind of sad. It's destroying the left. Okay, well, I guess that's about it. Is there anything else you'd like to add or talk about?
So just very quickly, I want to thank you for having me on.
Okay, sure.
I'm hoping the Harrington book, I'll hear word on it soon enough.
Okay.
But then you can get to your listeners, my other book on Louis Auguste Blanqui, Communist Insurgent.
Well, that's a great book too, and I'll have a picture of it. I meant to. It's in my bookcase right behind me, and I'll take it out. Yep, it's a great book.
Okay, I just want to put a plug for that. And if you want to see my writings, including the Harrington piece, it's on my blog at theblankist.blogspot.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Doug. Thank you for sharing your insights. Appreciate it. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Debout les damnés de la terre, debout les forçats de la faim, la raison commence au cratère, c'est l'éruption de la faim. Du passé, faisons table rase, foule esclave, debout, le monde va changer de base, nous ne sommes rien, soyons doux. C'est la lutte finale, pour nous et demain. L'internationale sera le genre humain. C'est la lutte finale, pour nous et demain. L'internationale sera le genre humain. Il n'est pas de sauveur suprême, ni Dieu, ni César, ni tribun. Producteurs, sauvons-nous nous-mêmes, décrétons le salut commun, pour que le vol rende gorge, pour tirer l'esprit du cachot. Soufflons nous-mêmes notre forge, battons le fer quand il est chaud. C'est la lutte finale.